my fellow assassins, to another episode of the Dark Assassins podcast, the show that dives deep into not just technology, but the concepts, software, and procedures behind it all, and explains it so simply that even your grandma can understand it. As always, I'm your host, the Dark Assassin. Now, I'd first like to wish all of you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I hope you're all spending some time with your family. Hopefully, if you work, you're enjoying some time off of work. And if you're still in school, hopefully you're enjoying a nice vacation. Now, I am strategically placing this episode in between both Christmas and New Year so I can kind of capitalize on both of them. But this episode is rather a continuation or the fourth installment in our core modules series, which we started last year at this time. Now, as just kind of a quick reminder of what the core modules series was, it's essentially my version of my greatest hits, if you will. And it's basically just a series of clips that either I thought was funny, I thought was insightful, or just some of my overall favorite moments that I've had while doing the podcast. Now, previously, as in last year, it was throughout the history of the podcast. But seeing as the last time we recorded a core modules episode, it got all the way up to present day at that time. This will only be taking into account the past years worth of clips and episodes from the Dark Assassins podcast. But I will say that this is a very shameless plug right here. But if someone ever asks you what the Dark Assassins podcast is, or you want to refer them to it, honestly, these 4 and potentially more episodes as we make them in the future would probably be the best to start, in my opinion, just because it kind of gives them a general sense of kind of the goodness and the fun and the shenanigans that can sometimes go on here. It'll give them kind of a glimpse into, oh yeah, that's some insightful info, where wow, that is absolutely hilarious, or he is kind of off his rocker, this is crazy, whatever the case may be for the given clip, but it'll give them kind of a good sense of the things that go on this podcast. But before we get into the core modules for this installment, we need to address the elephant in the room. Or rather, we should address the elephant in the data center, because RAM prices are absolutely out of control. Now, I had seen like some murmurings and whisperings online about, oh, RAM prices are out of control, this, that, and the other. And only recently did I myself decide to go and dig into the subject. And let's just say I feel really bad for anyone looking to start building a homelab right now, or anyone just looking for RAM in general, because these prices are absolutely ludicrous. So for some context, when I built my NAS in 2023, it was kind of the end of 2023. I think it was like October timeframe or something like that. I bought a Dell R730, which takes DDR4 ECC RAM. So I was looking to cram as much RAM in it for as few sticks as possible for as cheap as possible, and I ended up settling on a four sticks of 32 gigs of ECC 2400 DDR4 LRDIMMs. Now, all of that tech jargon aside, that isn't really relevant. The whole point of this is I paid $100 for those 4 sticks. Similar configurations of RAM are going for 7 times that right now. And if you want to buy individual sticks and kind of like hodgepodge it together, it's still like 4 times as expensive. Like, you can buy like the same size, capacity, and speed RAM that I bought is now going for usually well over $100 now. Like, if you can find one under $100, that's considered a quote good deal. But mind you, I got 4 for $100 2 years ago. And in some cases, I saw sellers asking for as much as $175 for a 32 gig stick of DDR4 RAM. Like, what is going on? Now, the simple answer is Micron decided to stop and basically pull out of the RAM game and focus on like data center GPUs for RAM for them, and that's kind of been like a trend where because of the whole AI bubble, I mean boom, that we're in, um they manufacturers are focusing their efforts to where the money is, where the cash cow is, and kind of ignoring the consumer, which is kind of driving up prices on the used market. Now, the reason why this all kind of sparked was because for giggles, I decided what L R640s, that's a new one for me. R640s are going for on the used market. And I found some decent deals on eBay. But then I realized, most of these R640s are either have no RAM or very little RAM, and it wouldn't be able to replace my R620 because my R620 obviously has a heck of a lot more RAM than what these guys have. My R620 has 192 gigs. So ideally, I'd like to be as close as I can to that number as far as RAM is concerned before I'd be willing to swap out the R620 and put in a new server, just because of how many virtual machines the R620 runs. It's basically the core of the homelab, essentially. It runs almost everything. And it uses a lot of RAM as a result. So I wanted to make sure that I would be able to accommodate that. So then that's, of course, how I got looking at RAM prices, because I was like, how much does a DDR4 ECC go these days that I could shove into this R640? And basically, to get the amount of RAM I would want, I'd be basically spending as much money in RAM as I would on the server itself, which is kind of mind-boggling. Now, in fairness, that was kind of always true in the server world, like if you were trying to build a home lab, but it always there was a tipping point. So like if you wanted to go like way like in the stratosphere as far as RAM concerned, like hundreds and hundreds of gigabytes of RAM, then yeah, you're probably going to be spending close to as much on RAM as the server. But this is like basically chump change in terms of in RAM configurations. So the fact that I'd be spending way more on RAM rather than the server itself was kind of a I'll just stick with what I have, thank you. But because the annoying thing is, well, maybe not necessarily annoying, but the thing of it is, RAM is one of those components that you can't just swap out, right? Like for the R620, I could swap over the drives, the SSD pool that I have, no big deal. Could swap over the network card, no big deal. Swap over the GPU, no big deal. Everything would work fine. It's just the things like the CPU and the RAM that you obviously can't change over because DDR3 is not compatible with the R640, so the RAM that I had in there obviously wouldn't work, so I would need new RAM for it. So hence the issue there. So I think I will probably be holding off. I which is kind of weird because I really haven't bought anything for my home lab in quite some time. Honestly, the credit card company is probably scratching their head and wondering if my credit card was stolen because I haven't bought anything on eBay computer related in well over a year. So they're probably like, is this guy okay? Do we need to perform like a health check or something? Like, so yeah, I just wanted to kind of address that. So for all of you out there that are either looking to build a home lab or upgrade your home lab, I definitely feel for you because these RAM prices are absolutely out of control. Now, before we actually get into the core modules, there was one last thing that I wanted to touch on briefly, which is the Spotify Wrapped. Now, I've done this in past years. I don't think I did it last year. Um, But I kind of clicked through it, the Spotify for Creators, and just out of curiosity, and if there was anything interesting, I'd add it in here. And there was some interesting tidbits, so I just kind of wanted to hit some of the highlights. So, according to the Spotify Wrapped, this podcast had a 265% increase in audience from last year, and a 56% increase in followers. So that's all thanks to y'all for liking, subscribing, and sharing with your friends and family members because I know I've said this before on the podcast, but I do not promote this at all in my personal life. So if someone comes up to me and asks me what I do or what I do in my free time, this podcast does not get mentioned. The only time it really gets mentioned is when I kind of get backed into a corner about it, which has happened a couple of times. But I basically do it begrudgingly and don't even tell them to listen to it. I just say like, yeah, it exists. But I've also said on numerous occasions that the entire growth of this podcast has been from y'all liking, sharing, subscribing, and sharing with friends and family members because that's how this podcast spreads. The only, I guess, quote unquote promotion that gets done is I'll post on the Dark Assassins Inc. Facebook and LinkedIn page about an episode, but that's about it. So the main bulk of the growth of this podcast is all thanks to the listeners, you, my fellow assassins. So shout out to you. And that's kind of what I always wanted for this podcast. I wanted it to be kind of a grassroots type of thing. I didn't want it to be like super advertisey and pushy like that because that's always a turnoff for me. I never really like when that happens. So I always wanted to kind of be the type of podcaster and content creator, if I can even call myself that, that I wanted to see. And hopefully I have been that for you. And obviously, you all enjoy it because you're the ones that are sharing it and allowing it to grow. So, on the topic of growth, we have now reached 21 different countries, which is pretty cool. The top five being at number 5 is the United Kingdom, at number 4 is Denmark, at number 3 is Germany, at number 2 is India, and number 1 is unsurprisingly the United States. Now, of course, the United States does not surprise me in the slightest because that is where I am from, so that doesn't really surprise me. But shout out to Denmark, Germany, and India for breaking into the top 5. And as far as I know, I don't think any of those countries are native English speakers, so shout out to you. And another really odd statistic that the Spotify Wrapped had was top Spotify artists that the listeners, or I guess followers of the podcast listen to. So again, starting from number 5 is AC/DC. I see you have great choice. Number 4 is Taylor Swift. So I guess we have some Swifties in the audience. Number 3 is Kendrick Lamar. Number 2 is Pretim. I'm not sure who that is. And number 1 is Morgan Wallen. So I guess we also have some country fans in the audience as well. And according to Spotify, the show has outpaced 91% of other shows in growth. And the fans listen to this show longer than 81% of their other shows. So you guys apparently seem to really enjoy the podcast, which, I mean, I guess on the one hand, that growth number outpacing 91% of other shows is a little bit skewed in the sense of the size comparison. I mean, we technically grew an audience 265%, which I think is kind of a lot harder for shows with like millions of listeners. It's kind of hard to grow that much. But when you're small, you kind of have that advantage. So take that, big dogs. So yeah, again, the whole amount of growth from this podcast has been from you, the listeners. So shout out to you. And the funny thing that I also found interesting about the Spotify Wrapped is all this like massive growth and stuff also came in the same year where we dropped the frequency of episodes from weekly to kind of haphazardly whenever I come out with one, which since then has kind of sort of been monthly ish. Although part of that was dependent on an Apple event, and then I guess, yeah, I mean, it's technically been monthly, but I don't know how realistic monthly that is, but regardless, it's been more of I kind of go at my own pace. And I actually got some feedback from the last episode that said that the listener was basically saying how happy and enjoying of the episode I sounded. Like I sounded really upbeat in it, and I was like, yeah, I mean that's kind of what happens when I'm making the episodes out of pure enjoyment, which is absolutely what that episode was. So all the growth, despite of cutting back on the frequency, I think that just goes to show how great of a fan base and listener base that we have here at the Dark Assassins podcast. Okay, now all of that preamble out of the way, back to the core modules. So we begin this installment with a moment from actually the very first core modules episode, where I pitched an idea for a real estate site like Zillow or Redfin, but to have filters tailored towards homelabbers. So this is core modules part 1, episode 139. I just wanted to give a quick business proposition. So I know I have bashed and hated on web developers in the past and clowned on JavaScript, but I want to reach out to you with an olive branch today. My business opportunity for you is a web application, kind of like a Zillow, Redfin, or some other like home searching type application, but for home labbers. So one of the things that Zillow and those other types of websites severely lack is accommodations for home labbers. And what do I mean by this? Well, sure, you can have a basement filter. I mean, a basement is pretty clutch if you want to have a home lab because you can just throw it down in the basement. It's generally fairly climate controlled, and you can close the door to the basement and you don't have to hear your server rack blowing all the time. So that is a big plus. But what they often don't include are filters for a dedicated server room. Do they have Ethernet cable run through the house? These kinds of things that a home labber would love to have in a home, they just don't really have filters for them, which is quite annoying. And if you're thinking I'm being a little I don't know what the term is, but if you're thinking that like you're being like so needy, like why do you need something to be able to filter based on if something has a server room? You can filter for offices. Like if you want an office in your new place, you can do that as a search filter. And if you think about it, what are offices in like 99%, well, maybe not 99, but like 90% of use cases, what are offices aside from spare bedrooms, if we're being honest with ourselves? Because at my place right now, that is literally all my office is. It's just the second bedroom that I'm obviously not using, which also happens to serve as my server room, which also happens to serve as like my dedicated storage place because my house has no storage. But these are the kinds of things that I'm thinking of, when it comes to a home labber. They would be kind of looking for these things, like does the place have a server room? What kind of electrical outlets are there? Does it have, the types of outlets that would be required to run a massive rack? Things like this that your average home buyer probably isn't looking for or caring about, but a home labber definitely would. So this is, I think, a golden opportunity, and I think I'll just leave it with Han Solo, what his quote was. If you don't take up this business opportunity.
You're throwing away a fortune here. Don't be a fool.
Very well said, Han. I couldn't have said it any better myself. Now, unfortunately, since airing that episode, no one has yet reached out to me for that business proposition, so I guess all of the web developers out there are just happy to throw away a fortune, which is, really just their loss. I mean, I'm not really losing anything here. It is my idea after all, but there would be the main developers for it and would be able to take the large amount of the proceeds for it. I would just get, some minor royalties out of the deal. But the next this clip actually comes from the following episode after we finished the core module series, where I really nerded out about the Ready Player One books. And this is coming from Nerding Out About Nerdy Books, episode 142. Shortly after I watched the Ready Player One movie for the first time, which I talked about in one episode we did, I believe it was episode 69, which was a pretty nice episode. And I picked up the book and the sequel and read through them. So there, in case you didn't know, the Ready Player One movie was I guess very loosely based off a book of the same name, Ready Player One, and there's also a sequel to the Ready Player One book called Ready Player Two. And technically, I guess the first one I listened to like through an audiobook, but if you wanted to argue with me that listening to an audiobook does not count as reading, I did ask an authoritative source on the subject, that being someone who works at a library, and they assured me that listening to audiobooks counts as reading, so checkmate. The second book, Ready Player Two, that is, made me do something I had not done in ages, and that was actually sit down and read. Because when I read through the first book, I just kind of did it, just kind of listening to it while I was kind of doing other things like walking or something else, and kind of listening to it passively while also paying attention to it. But the second book, I genuinely, I would do that as well, but then I would genuinely sit down, stop, not do anything else, pick up the actual book itself, because I also had the book as well as the audiobook, and read along with the book as I listened, to the audiobook. And it was something I had never done in I don't know how long, and basically I just didn't want to put the book down because I wanted to see how things would go. Now, all this preamble to say, last year around the holidays, I decided to reread the books, and then this year I also decided to reread them again around the holidays, unintentionally starting a tradition of rereading them around the holidays. And as I did that, I just kind of wanted to dive into some of the moments in each of the books that I liked. The first thing that I wanted to address was the data transfer speed that goes on in the book, kind of in the latter half of it. So the quote specifically from the book was, quote, "Even using the plug's high bandwidth fiber optic connection, the total estimated upload time for 10 zettabytes of data was over 3 hours." So if that made no sense to you, that's okay, because we're going to break it down. So the core thing to pull out of that was being able to transfer 10 zettabytes of data in over 3 hours. So less than 4, but more than 3, you're able to transfer 10 zettabytes worth of data. So what does that even mean? Well, let's break it down. So we all know what a terabyte is, right? It's 1,024 gigabytes. So if you want to get to the next level, that would be a petabyte, which is 10,024 terabytes. And then if you want to get to an exabyte, that would be 10,024 petabytes. And then to get to a zettabyte, that would be 10,024 exabytes. Okay, so this is me from the present day, and I realized that listening to this clip back, I said 10,024, but in reality, it should have been 1,024. Not sure why I didn't catch that in the actual episode, but just for clarity, it's 1,024. But anyway, back to the clip. So that would be essentially 10 times 10 to the 24, and, to a certain power for whatever denotion you want. So what we can do to actually figure out the transfer speed, which I guess I should mention, 10 zettabytes is an absolute boatload of data. Now, the funny thing is you'll hear people talk about like either in homelab spaces or data centers, talking about like a petabyte project, where they essentially try to assemble a petabyte's worth of storage, whether that's in hard drives or SSDs SSDs or something like that. And that is like a massive undertaking. And we kind of established here that just a singular exabyte is 10,024 petabytes. And then you have to take another 10,024 of those exabytes to create a single zettabyte. So we're talking an absolute massive amount of data here. And you're able to transfer all of that in 3 hours. Or I guess just over 3 hours, or over 3 hours is the actual quote. So what we can do is we can plug those numbers into Omni's data transfer calculator, which unfortunately they don't allow you to give zettabytes or even exabytes for the units. But what they do allow you to do is give petabytes, which is why we kind of went through, which is one of the reasons why I gave that kind of context going through the different conversion rates. So what we can do is if we convert those 10 zettabytes to petabytes, that gives us 10,485,760 petabytes, or essentially 10 to the 24 squared times 10. And then we give the time frame for how long this data transfer will take place, which I gave the estimate of 3 hours and 15 minutes. And that gives us roughly 7.17 billion, that's billion with a B, gigabits per second. Now, converting that into a smaller number, that would be approximately 6.68 exabits per second. So you heard me right, exabits per second. So imagine the travesty that you'd have to endure of having to put up with only 6.6 exabits per second as your internet connection speed prior to this data transfer speed, and that is all of the various hacking, lateral movement, and backdoor shenanigans that goes on in the book. So in the book, the main character, Parzival, aka Wade Watts, goes on the Oasis's version of the dark web, and the Oasis is kind of their whole like virtual reality it's basically the entire internet to them. So he goes on that version of the dark web and buys a series of passwords, exploits, and backdoors for IOI's network. And IOI is essentially like a big multinational conglomerate that is trying to take over the Oasis. They're like the evil bad guys, and they basically control a lot of the world's internet infrastructure, as well as like various gear in order to allow you to access the Oasis. Anyway, this leaked info that Wade was able to download was from a former IOI contractor that designed the network. But the catch here is the only way that you could perform these exploits, backdoors, and use these passwords was if you were inside the network itself. So this section of the book is one of the best examples of an insider threat that I've ever read. Now, granted, I haven't read a whole lot of books on insider threats, so there might be better examples. But, the point here is this book wasn't meant to, depict, and being a prime example of an insider threat, yet it does it so well, at least in my opinion. So Wade, who at the time, he hacks his entertainment console, then with the limited capability that granted him, he created a bogus admin account so he could then laterally move throughout the network with basically as much privilege as he wanted. And then when he hit a roadblock, he could use that admin account to create another bogus account with super user privileges to get to the various things he wasn't able to access prior to that in order to exfiltrate a bunch of data, which then kind of comes back to bite the company because then they get burned by it, all the data that he got off from them. So yeah, this is basically the definition of an insider threat, and really one that you really would not expect. I mean, I think probably if I could put myself in the mindset of IOI here, probably the last thing and last place they would expect to get hacked from was one of their indentured servants through a locked down entertainment console. So yeah, I think this just kind of goes to show why, insider threats are definitely a serious thing, and why you should. One of the reasons people like to implement, zero trust policies is for this exact reason. You shouldn't be trusting anyone on the network, even if they've already been previously authenticated by some other means. Just having a policy of zero trust can at least help mitigate, the risk of some of these things like this from happening. Now, the next part is actually from both books, but also kind of in the spirit of cybersecurity is kind of in the same vein, and that is the big red button. Now, the big red button is also in the movie version as well, but because we're talking about the books, I'm just gonna stick to the books for this. So the big red button is a button with the word off on it, and it serves a couple of purposes. The first purpose is it completely shuts down the Oasis, and the second purpose is it launches a worm to destroy all the code, servers, backup servers, so the Oasis can never come back online. Now, before we get into the craziness that is that second point, let's address the first, point and a half, and how easy that would be to actually implement if you were actually trying to write this code yourself. So I think the first one is pretty obvious, right? Shut down the Oasis if the button is pressed. Basic if statement. If button is pressed, do action. So if the button is pressed, this kind of gets into the first half of that second bullet. You launch said worm program, which assuming would be lying dormant somewhere. And then when the button is pressed, you use some code to launch said worm, and then you shut down the game, the Oasis, however you want to do that, exit the program, however it ends up being, you shut it down. But now let's get into the fun stuff, diving into how this theoretical worm actually works. Now, first off, you have to have written one heck of a back door that no one would have noticed or have taken advantage of previously in order for you to deploy a worm to instantly take down everything. Now, whether this is a backdoor or some 0 day that Halliday, who was the creator of the Oasis, has been kept under wraps from everyone and no one happened to notice, which, to be honest, I find a little hard to believe, in the sense that in the books, the Gregarious Simulation Systems, or GSS, which is essentially the company that created the Oasis, is essentially like the modern day FANG companies if you put them all together. In other words, they basically house the best of the best developers, like the cream of the crop. And if you mean to tell me that none of them could find this hidden backdoor in the code all this time, I'm not sure I buy that. I mean, I guess there's the chance that when Halliday, created the big red button, that was the original intent, and as far as he knew, it was still able to work in that sense, but has since been patched. I mean, I guess that's a possibility. The book doesn't really go into that. But the other thing that's interesting is, even if we assume that the backdoor or 0 day or whoever this worm is going to be spreading still exists, the other intriguing thing about this is, how do you actually guarantee that everything actually gets destroyed? And in order to kind of answer that question, I think we should kind of dive in more specifically on how the worm would actually work. Now, these are kind of my assumptions just from the overall principles kind of we established of how a worm gets unleashed and will destroy essentially all the Oasis, take down all the backup servers, and destroy all the source code. So here's my assumption of how the worm actually will work. So when the worm gets unleashed, it exploits some sort of backdoor or 0 day vulnerability to infect itself on all the servers running the Oasis and then delete everything. Simple enough. But similarly, the worm would also have to target any system that hosts their version of source control, which I'm assuming they're using some kind of version control for the Oasis, I would assume. So it would have to identify all of those systems as well, perform some other backdoor 0 day something, and to get onto those systems and then delete them. all the version control to delete the source code. Then it would also it also makes mention in the book that it destroys all the backup servers too. Geez, how many 0 days are you exploiting here? So since it has to get onto the backup servers as well, it would again have to use some kind of 0-day exploit or backdoor or something to get onto the backup servers and then wipe everything there. Now, I guess if, since the book says Halliday, the creator of the Oasis, is like this mad genius, like super guy that, could basically do any kind of coding thing that he wants and it just happens, I guess it's also possible if he created the entire Oasis, he also created the version control system that they're using. So essentially they're not using Git or, SVN or any of those others. They have their own separate version control that Halliday created. And then also whatever they're using, whatever software operating system their backup servers are running, Halliday also programmed, in which case he could have, programmed some kind of 0-day or backdoor that only he knew about and his worm would use to exploit in order to gain access to these systems. So that's kind of my general guess and assumption of how this worm would actually work if assuming all this world was actually real. So, but the main issue is if one of those, what would happen if one of those backup servers just happened to be down for some kind of maintenance or something? Then the worm, when it got unleashed, wouldn't actually be able to destroy everything because one of the servers was down. Now, the countermeasure to this for the worm's perspective would be the worm never dies because essentially once the worm infects the system, it just always is there, whether you do some kind of rootkit embed or you kind of embeds itself in kind of like the bootloader or firmware or some like low-level place where it's a lot harder to get rid of. Essentially, the worm never dies once its main goal is done, just for in the event that some other Oasis system comes back online, it can then go and infect that system and then destroy it as well. So basically, the worm just kind of sits dormant, scanning the internet for future copies of the Oasis in order to infect and destroy them. So that's kind of my interpretation of how a countermeasure would work to ensure that even if, like, say, a backup server or an Oasis server was offline for maintenance, it would still end up being destroyed anyway because the worm would just lie dormant amongst all the other systems that existed, and then once that system comes back online, boom, the worm infects it and takes care of it. But what about a standalone copy? Because in the second book, they make a scaled-down version of the Oasis that they call Arcade, and it's basically on their spaceship and is completely separate from the Oasis. And they even make a mention in the book that they were able to completely sever the connection between the Oasis and Arcade, essentially making them completely inaccessible from one another. So you could kind of think of this as, like in your home network, if you have a bunch of computers connected to a switch, they can all talk to each other and, network together. But they can also get out to the internet, assuming your router is plugged into it. But then if you unplug the router, those systems can't access the internet anymore, but they can still, talk to themselves because they're on their own standalone network. So in this case, if someone were to have a completely separate standalone Oasis that the worm would never be able to access because it's completely offline, then this kind of brings up the question again of how can you ensure that the Oasis is completely destroyed by using this worm, because there could be such a case where there is just kind of a standalone, completely separate version that is completely offline that the worm would never be able to access. So interesting to think about. At least I thought it was. So I was intrigued when the book dropped this little tidbit about being able to travel to Proxima Centauri in their spaceship that they're developing and being able to reach Proxima Centauri in around 47 years or so. So if we take 47 years to reach Proxima Centauri, my research told me that Proxima Centauri is around 4.2 light years away. So if we do all the math and calculate it, we would need to travel at around 9% the speed of light in order to get to Proxima Centauri in 47 years. Now, this, for all of you questioning my math, like all the physicists out there, let me walk through things just so you kind of see how I came up with that 9% number. So we take 1 light year, we multiply that by 4.24, because Proxima Centauri is 4.2 light years away, and we get a very large number, which is over 40 quadrillion meters, or in English for us Americans, that's around 25 trillion miles. So we take 47 years and we convert that to seconds. That gives us approximately 1.5 billion seconds. So then to calculate the velocity, we take the distance divided by the time. So that would be our 40 quadrillion meters divided by our 1.5 billion seconds. And then we take that velocity number and we divide it by the speed of light and then multiply that by 100, so we actually get the percentage, and that gives us roughly 9% the speed of light. Now, if we plug that into my time dilation calculator that I created, traveling at around 9% the speed of light, while for the passengers on the spaceship, they would age 47 years, those still on Earth would have aged around 47.2 years, or about 10 weeks more than those passengers on the spaceship. Now, granted, I am just a code monkey who occasionally breaks stuff in his home lab and not a physicist, so any physicists out there in the audience, please feel free to correct me if my math is wrong in any way. So that one I just thought was kind of fun because it kind of took me back to some of the early roots of what I got up to when writing programs. The next one is, in the book, they very nonchalantly make a comment that they added 1 million yottabytes to their, storage capacity. And I figured we should probably dive into the math behind that, because the book like I said, it so nonchalantly just makes the comment, yeah, we just added 1 million yottabytes. No big deal. Now, granted, this book takes place in the future, so like we see in present day, every single year, more storage becomes available for cheaper prices. It gets more dense and becomes cheaper. So let us go back to our context from the first portion we did, which was that data transfer calculation. So we will recall that 1 petabyte is equal to 1024 terabytes. 1 exabyte is equal to 1024 petabytes. 1 zettabyte is equal to 1024 exabytes, and 1 yottabyte is equal to 1024 zettabytes. So we are talking a massive amount of data. Then you have to multiply that by 1 million because we have 1 million yottabytes. So according to TechRadar, the largest storage device on the market as of right now is the Exadrive EDDCT100 by Nimbus Data, and TechRadar claims the retail price is $40,000. Now, I was not able to independently confirm this since Nimbus Data's website doesn't list the price, because I'm pretty sure it's one of those things, if you have to ask, you can't afford it type things. So in theory, you could also get away with smaller drives that would have a better cost to terabyte ratio, but then you would need more of basically everything. You would need more servers to stick said drives into, and you would also need more server racks, and because the scale we're talking about, you would need more data centers. So I didn't do the math because I don't know how much it costs to build out an entire data center, or what servers you would be selecting to stick all these drives into. So I didn't do that math specifically, but I did do the calculations of how much it would cost, at least with today's technology, to get 1 million yottabytes. And spoiler alert, it's mind-blowing. So in theory, you could get away with, smaller drives, which would be cheaper, at least in terms of the drives. But again, because of the amount of drives we're talking about, there is the potential chance that with the cost of all the data centers and servers, it may even out, it may not. Like I said, I didn't do the math on that, but it is definitely something to consider. So, for context, the largest hard drive, at least soon to be, is 32 terabytes from Seagate. Now, currently there's no price for that, and you can't buy them, at least as of the recording of this episode. So our next best thing is a 24 terabyte drive, and you can buy those for roughly $479.99 a pop. And the reason why I point out the 99 cents there is because on the scale of sheer number of drives we're talking about, that 1 cent will definitely make a difference in the long run. So let's start off with the 100 terabyte SSDs calculation. So in order to get to yottabytes, we have to take 1024 to the power of 4 in order to convert terabytes to yottabytes, and then we have to multiply that by 1 million because we have to account for 1 million yottabytes. So that gives us roughly 1.1 quintillion terabytes that we need to account for. So if we divide that by 100, because each of our drives has 100 terabytes, that gives us roughly 11 quadrillion drives that we need to purchase in order to get to our 1 million yottabytes. Now, if we multiply that 11 quadrillion by $40,000, that gives us roughly $439.8 quintillion just in drives alone. So that's not including servers, that's not including data centers or server racks or RAM or graphics cards or anything else, or CPUs or anything that you need to power the servers, or electricity for that matter. So that number of $439.8 quintillion kind of makes the US debt look like chump change. So now let's go with the cheaper option, at least in cost per terabyte, which is the 24 terabyte hard drives option. So we already established that we need to account for 1.1 quintillion terabytes. So we basically do the same math, but rather than dividing by 100, we divide by 24, since now our drives have 24 terabytes rather than 100. And that gives us 45.8 quadrillion drives we need. So basically a little over 4 times more drives, just because we're going from 100 to 24, which definitely makes sense. If 24 is almost 25, 4 times less than 100, so, checks out. So then we multiply the 479.9 by that 45.8 quadrillion drives, and that gives us a grand total of roughly $22 quintillion, which is a huge cost savings compared to the $439.8 quintillion that the 100 terabyte drives would cost. But you also have to account the fact that we're using 4 times the number of drives, which means we would need to factor that into our overall cost, that being things like servers, server racks, data centers, all that good stuff that you would need to factor in. Because I didn't run the numbers, I'm not sure if all those additional costs would completely eliminate the massive, whatever that is, over 400 quintillion dollars worth of cost savings. But I would think you'd probably still be okay. But like I said, I didn't do the math on it, so I can't say for sure. But yeah, I mean, you're still using 4 times the drives, which is definitely a lot. But we're also talking about astronomical numbers. So the last one I wanted to do just for kind of fun was just an estimate of a 32 terabyte drive, because that is soon to be the biggest that you can get. So I'm going to assume the price of one of these 32 terabyte drives is $600. That could be way off, or maybe that's spot on. I have no idea, but I'm just going to roll with it for this example here. So our math is basically the same as before. We take our 1.1 quintillion terabytes and we divide it by 32 to get the number of drives we need, and that gives us roughly 34.4 quadrillion drives. And then if we multiply that by 600, we get roughly $21 quintillion for the 32 terabyte option. So you save over $1 quintillion, which for context would be enough to pay down the U.S. national debt 576,444 times with some money left over. So, of course, we're talking about absolutely astronomical numbers in today's day, but it's wild to think that maybe in, I don't know how many years, this whole calculation would be laughable, that it would have cost you that much money in 2025 to create a million have a million yottabytes. It's like, we get that in our laptops nowadays. Well, probably not, because they had to pay all that for like their data center, so probably not a million yottabytes. But who knows, they might be saying, it costs you that much. Well, I mean, we have laptops now with exabyte drives or something like that. I don't know, I'm just spitballing here. So I know that was a very, very, very long sequence of clips, but that just kind of goes to show how much I really, really enjoyed that episode. And you could probably tell in my voice during that episode of how much I was enjoying myself, because I was absolutely having a ball. But I actually skipped a decent amount of the episode. A lot of the hacking parts, I kind of cut out that entire segment in lieu of just kind of the recap that I gave. And then I cut out some other bits and pieces too. So it's definitely worth revisiting and listening to if you haven't already. And then also at the very beginning of that episode, I kind of went on a little bit of a tangent and a couple other rants about books and reading in general, which I found to be kind of funny. But for the sake of time, I did cut them out for this core module segment. But I, again, do highly encourage you to go and listen to that episode. The next episode is one that most people probably don't understand, but for me, I thought it was hilarious. And that comes from How the Internet Works Part 2, TCP/IP, episode 150. If you think of this, in terms of the post office, your IP address is basically the city or the state that you live in, assuming you're living in the US. And it basically tells the post office which network or which distribution center to initially send the data to, send the mail, send the letter, send the package, whatever. But then your MAC address is like your physical street address. So something like, 324 Roundhouse Lane. Shout out to the couple people that actually got that reference. And it's basically permanently assigned to your house and is used for the local delivery. Now, I know most people that listen to that clip probably don't think anything of it. Okay, cool, you gave the post office analogy, big whoop, that's not very interesting. But the key point in there, which is why I put it in here, was the inside joke that lives within that analogy, as I kind of keenly put it out with the whole shout out to the few people that actually get that reference. But again, this is my show, so I can make my greatest hits, and that is one of my more favorite clips, because I was able to slide an inside joke that probably nobody really gets, aside from a few select people. But nonetheless, I got quite the bit of enjoyment being able to slide it in there. This next one is when we talked about one of my other favorite passions, which is driving, and how I found an open source tool to help me with that, and hopefully help you if you enjoy driving. So here is that clip talking about curvature from Software Meets Driving, Software Engineer Q&A, Operation Core Dump, episode 154. I wanted to highlight a project called Curvature, and there specifically, I'll have all the links down in the show notes, of course, but specifically the website Road Curvature. Now, if you're like me, you love a few things. One of them being writing tons and tons of code, tinkering around with a homelab, and driving on twisty, curvy, and technical back roads. Now, usually on this podcast, seeing that it is very software development and technology focused, I don't really get a chance to talk about that latter one. But for me, well, obviously we're talking about it now because this open source project that I recently discovered exists. But we usually, like I said, we usually address the former two, but not necessarily the latter. Now, before this week, typically what I would do if I wanted to find a fun road to drive on is I would pore over map data and just spend basically hours, searching maps for potential roads that might be curvy, twisty, and fun to drive on. And basically, the only way that you can do that on, modern maps, whether that's Apple Maps, Google Maps, OpenStreetMap, whatever the case is, you have to zoom in really, really closely in order to actually see some of these good small back roads. Because typically, if you're zoomed far out, the only roads you're going to see are like your major highways and your interstates, which are typically pretty straight and boring, not to mention the fact that they're usually pretty congested, especially if you live anywhere near a city. Now, of course, if you live out in the middle, one thing I talked about was each road is given a curvature score. So how the curvature score is defined is as follows. So a curvature score of less than 300 is, quote, might be a few fun corners on these, but these roads are predominantly straight and have long distances between each significant curve. So basically, if you see something less than 300, it's probably just going to be your typical generic road. From 300 to 1,000, these roads have several significant corners close together. They aren't likely touring destinations unless you're stuck with otherwise straight roads in the region, but if you're looking to spice up your commute with a few corners, these might be more fun than the direct route. Yeah, kind of makes sense. Typically, if you're just trying to use your GPS to, say, commute to work, probably like 90 to 95% of the time, it's just going to take you the most direct route, which is probably mostly straight. Maybe you'll make some right and left-hand turns to change which road you're on, but overall, you're probably not doing a whole lot of curving and bending, winding around, which, depending on where you live, that literally might be the only option. There might not be multiple roads that you can drive on to get to where you're trying to go. Then we have a score of 1,000 to 3,000. This range has a lot of fun roads. They usually have a few dozen corners and generally feel more winding than straight. As we'll get to a little bit later here, my previous favorite road to drive on before the past few months or so did fall in this category, which it definitely fits this description. It definitely had a good number of corners to it, and it generally did feel a lot more windy than straight. But then again, comparison to some of the other roads, it kind of can't hold a candle, but we'll get to that in a little bit. 3,000 to 10,000. For much of the world, this range includes the destination roads that people may ride for hours in order to visit. These roads will usually have long sections of tight turns, often for miles on end. In the northeastern United States, the best roads are all in this range. So if you've ever lived in the eastern portion of the United States, I guess the Northeast in this case, but also really anywhere kind of in the Appalachian Mountain region, there are tons and tons of very windy, twisty back roads that generally rate kind of in this very high realm. And then we have any curvature score of over 10,000, and they say these are truly epic roads with miles upon miles of twists and turns. So the one thing that I really liked about this whole curvature score thing was the fact that it kind of gave that tangible number value to roads that I was used to driving on, to kind of give a little more, I guess, basically a confirmation bias, if you will, of yes, this road was better than this road, and here's why. because before that, I could basically tell you, yes, this road was more fun to drive on than that one. Well, why was it more fun to drive? I don't know. I mean, I guess there was more turns, and I don't know. I guess it was more engaging. But here, you actually have a legitimate score associated to each of the different roads, so you can kind of have a direct apples to apples comparison. Now, granted, there is, I guess, a chance that now, if you've never heard of the Tail of the Dragon before, it's an 11-mile stretch of road on US 129 in Tennessee. It goes from Tennessee to North Carolina, just into North Carolina, and it has 318 curves in those 11 miles. So if you do the math on that, that's just shy of about 30 curves per mile. Now, there's probably two main people that are listening to this, their reactions when they heard, 318 curves in 11 miles. The one side of the folks are probably like, that sounds exhausting. And then you have the other camp that's like, that sounds incredible, sign me up. I, of course, fall into the latter camp. But what makes it even better, at least in my opinion anyway, which of course I am very biased, is if you're coming from Tennessee, the actual kind of like trading post, general store, attraction area, like where the actual, if you go to the Tail of the Dragon website, there's that like picture of a metal dragon statue. The only way to get to there is if you're coming from Tennessee, you have to drive down the entire tail to get there. If you're coming from North Carolina, it's, I guess, the beginning. So if you're coming from Tennessee, you basically have to drive down the entire Tail of the Dragon to get there, and then if you're going back the way you came, you basically get to drive the road twice, which is what I did, and it was incredible, and quite honestly, it wasn't enough, because if I wasn't in the means of trying to get somewhere that wasn't... Basically what happened was the Tail of the Dragon was a pit stop for me. But if it wasn't a pit stop, I could have easily spent the entire day, if not more, just driving up and down that road, and I would have been having the time of my life. So if you do, go from Tennessee to, the general store area and then back up, then it's really a 22-mile drive with 636 curves, which, like I said, still wasn't enough for me, and I would have happily spent all day there. But the point is, the Tail of the Dragon, they divided it up, I guess, into two portions. The one portion of it scored a 27,385, and the other portion scored a 22,410. And if you'll remember from the curvature score, the highest number was 10,000 plus. So this is over double, and in one case, almost triple that. So yeah, it is fantastic. And I have told friends and family this before, that it was hands down the most fun that I have ever had in a car, and the score definitely shows that. Now, the entire kind of reason why I went on this massive tangent. One was because I wanted to indulge myself and kind of relive the memories because they were so amazing. But two is I wanted to compare it. I mentioned and alluded to my previous favorite driving road, which scored a 2,511. So it was no wonder when I drove the Tail of the Dragon that I thought my previous favorite road was basically boring by comparison, because it was literally, according to the scores, orders of magnitude less than what the Tail of the Dragon was. Now, recently, I did discover my new favorite driving road, which is a little closer to home than Tail of the Dragon, because as much as I would love to go out and drive the Tail of the Dragon whenever I wanted to, I don't exactly have, multiple days to make a road trip out there and back. I don't exactly have that much time to take off of work. But so I did manage to find a road that was a little closer to where I am now. This was also before I discovered the road curvature app. And what I noticed was, so I thought the road was good. It obviously wasn't Tail of the Dragon good. I kind of joked to myself after I drove it for the first time that this is, I affectionately named the road, "We Have Tail of the Dragon at Home." Like it was good, and it kind of had some parts that kind of resembled the Tail of the Dragon, but of course it wasn't Tail of the Dragon and not as good. But it was still a definitely a very good road and better than my previous favorite. And the score definitely shows that, because it was also similar to the Tail of the Dragon. It was divided up into two main parts. The one part scored a 7,484, and the second part scored a 2,830, which kind of lines up to how I felt about it. That 7,484 section definitely was the part that I kind of attributed to We Have Tail of the Dragon at Home, and then the other portion, it was all right. It was definitely had some twists and turns, and it kind of felt like what my previous favorite was. Like, it was kind of bendy and twisty, but it wasn't like super tight and technical, like, Tail of the Dragon or the other portion of the road. But it was still definitely a good road to drive on, and it was just really cool to see, looking at these roads on this app, to kind of get those numbers and compare them. Now, that was another clip where I had to cut some pieces out, as you probably noticed when listening to it. So if you want to hear more and hear me sound even more like a kid on Christmas, go and listen to that episode after this one. But I actually have since used curvature to great success. So about maybe like 2 months ago, I decided to kind of road trip out about 2 hours away from my house. And then on the way back, I decided to take some very twisty, curvy roads that curvature helped me find, in order to come back what I called the fun way. So, but I mean, instead of being a 2 hour drive, it was more like just over 4 hours. But again, there was basically nobody on the road, since I was just driving back roads, and I was having so much fun, because I was, not driving boring straight lines. I was driving twists and curves, and without many people on the road. So it was definitely a very big joy. One of the other joys that I often get very excited about on the podcast is whenever WWDC comes around, because Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference means that Craig Federighi is going to make his appearances, and he always has something very, very good for us. So these next clips are both from that episode where we covered WWDC. This is coming from The Real F1 King, Air Force One has arrived, episode 163. This is not a car podcast, but it's not my fault that Apple decided to put multiple very notable car scenes inside of their keynote, and I'm just here reacting to it. Now, I guess that is assuming, of course, that I'm not secretly in Tim's ear and being like, hey man, I want to talk about cars on my podcast a little more. So can you find a way to work in some cars to WWDC in the keynote this year? And then, of course, since me and Tim are so tight, best buds, if you will, he'll just be like, yeah, of course, Dark Assassin, we can absolutely do that. I got you. So with that out of the way, I think we have to address the elephant in the room, which that is that intro scene with Craig Federighi being the absolute legend that he is, because he has once again done it again. So first off, we do have to address that Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, you guys need to sit down and step aside, because the real F1 King has just arrived and he's about to whoop your butts. Because as we saw in the opening keynote, he showed a tremendous amount of speed and skill handling an F1 car. And with Tim Cook as his crew chief, I mean, I'm not sure you could have asked for a better power duo. And they are absolutely going to run away with the F1 championship, if you ask me. Now, one of the best lines that was probably said in that intro scene was Craig's like, I'm in the lead. And then Tim comes over the radio and is like, you're the only one out there, Craig. Which I thought was absolutely hilarious. And then to turn things up a notch in the way that only Craig Federighi, aka Air Force One, can do, is he's like, yeah, I'm so glad we have CarPlay in this thing. And then he like turns it on and just starts blasting Round and Round by Rat, which is absolutely incredible. And then, of course, while he's doing this, he's just lapping around the top of the Apple spaceship or donut or whatever you want to call it, their headquarters in Cupertino, just doing laps around it. And then he is absolutely moving around that. And to top it all off, at the very end, when he pulls the car into the pits, gets out of the car, takes his helmet off, takes off the balaclava, the thing that you put under the helmet, and shows off his perfectly kept hair. Oh my goodness. This hair had even more volume than normal. I think I could tell it was a little there might have been a little computer assists there with like the volume and mass, because it looked like straight up Elvis hair with like how, high and swept back it was. Like, it was honestly very, very, very impressive, and without a doubt had many people swooning just seeing Craig in his element like that. Now, I guess this also has to ask the question, aside from it being absolute cinema, by the way, was it better than last year's? And that is a really tough call, because last year, I'm not sure how you can really top that. They're in a plane, they jump out of the plane to some Motley Crue Kickstart My Heart, and Craig Federighi puts on a helmet that is literally in the shape of his hair. I mean, I'm not sure how it gets much more epic than that, yet they kind of, at least, if they didn't top it, they got pretty darn close to being like right alongside it. So, not sure how I would rate it, but they were definitely pulling at my heartstrings a little bit with the whole racing vibe this year. Now, this next clip also comes from that exact same episode later on, and I'll just let me do the talking, but let's just say I got a little caught up in the Craig Federighi hype, and I let it get to me a little bit, but here is that clip. In pure Craig fashion, he of course found a way to humor us all, because Craig, in the various humorous way that he is, after the windowing demo was done, he said this, quote, "Wow, more windows, a pointier pointer, a menu bar? Who would have thought? We truly pulled off a mind-blowing release." Ladies and gentlemen, this is why we love this man, because right here at the Air Force One Craig Federighi Fan Club podcast. Oh wait, excuse me, hold on, wrong podcast. Sorry, this is the Dark Assassins Inc. or the Dark Assassins podcast, right? I'm getting all kerfuffled here with Craig Federighi and his legendary antics. Yeah, Craig Federighi never misses. He never disappoints. Every time that there is a Craig Federighi clip out there from an Apple keynote, you can almost bookmark that we will be talking about it here on the Dark Assassins podcast. See there, I made sure I didn't get all flustered and overwhelmed and excited because of all of his legendary antics. But the next clip we have comes from a time where well, actually a couple different instances, but we're going to focus on the first one, where my in-home alarming system notified me that my ISP was having an outage before my ISP did. And this is coming from Boot Camps vs. Computer Science Degrees, episode 169. I want to extend a thank you for trying message to my ISP. Now, I'm not going to name my ISP, but basically what happened this week was actually this morning, as a matter of fact, the day I'm recording this, I woke up to a flurry of notifications on my phone, and my ISP tried to send me an email to inform me that they detected a service outage. But like I said, I got a flurry of notifications this morning when I woke up, all from my monitoring system, basically letting me know that my home lab / home network was down and inaccessible. And sure enough, I went to check the modem when I got up and saw that it was blinking, which basically means it doesn't have a connection to the ISP. And I was like, okay, well, we'll give it the old turn it off and on again. So I unplugged it, replugged it in, and that didn't fix the issue. And mind you, I still had to go to work in the morning, so I really didn't have time to fiddle with this stuff and troubleshoot it. So I was like, I'll just deal with it later. Um, but I did keep tabs on it throughout the morning as I was getting ready to leave for work. And before I left, internet did get restored, so that was nice. I wasn't getting pinged all throughout the day, which was very nice. Although I mentioned the ISP sent an email saying that they detected a service outage. So this service outage email that they sent, they said that they detected the outage at 3:22 a.m. And I don't mean to brag or anything, but my homelab alert was firing off starting at 3:15 a.m. So I don't want to brag or anything, but all I'm saying is my homelab monitoring system to check if the internet's working is better than my ISP's apparently. Um so because I don't know if it's more robust or what the case is, but I was assuming I was actually up at 3:15 in the morning, which I was not. I was peacefully asleep. I would have been alerted by my notification system that my internet is down before my ISP knew that the internet was down, at least according to when they allegedly detected the service outage. And like I said in that clip, that was not the only time that that has happened. There was at least one other time that I can recall where my notification system notified me my internet was down before the ISP. And the second one that happened, I was actually using the internet and actually up and at my house when it happened. And I saw the notification come through my phone, and I was like, yeah, the internet's not working. I can see that. And then a few minutes later, I got the email notification from the ISP saying that, oh, it looks like the internet's down. It's like, yep, already knew that. Thanks. But appreciate you reaching out anyway, but, already knew that. So the last clip that I wanted to include for this episode installment of the core modules was from when I hacked myself. And this is coming from Amazon Web Services and the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. Episode 174. I hacked myself. And first off, the reason I had to hack myself was because I got my new MacBook Air. So the short version of this is I have a script that will basically install my SSH keys onto all of my servers, right? So I have an Ansible playbook that will deploy that all for me. And when I got my new MacBook Air, of course, I had to generate new SSH keys, and I ran the script to add my SSH keys to all of my servers, and everything was fantastic. And then so I guess a little bit of background. How this works is it first copies all the SSH keys to my Ansible users on my various servers that I use to access Ansible with. And then I have other standard users that I use when I actually want to log into the system to, do whatever I need to do. So this basically how the script works is it takes the authorized keys for the Ansible user and then copies them to the other user. The problem was there was a specific instance where there was a mismatch in SSH keys. So I basically ended up nuking my access that my phone has into my jump box that I use to basically manage my home lab when I'm either away or I don't feel like logging into something from like my laptop or something. I'll just log into the jump box and do things. So for instance, basically that jump box is my Ansible home. Like everything Ansible related is fully configured on there, so it just makes it easier just to log into that box and do whatever Ansible things I need to do. So I tried to do that with my phone and it was not working. At first I just kind of thought, okay, maybe the server's down or something. No, it was up. But I was getting an SSH key denial error, and I was like, that's weird. And then I was like, oh, I probably nuked the key when I ran my script to copy the SSH keys. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. So I was away from home at the time and I was impatient. So I wanted to get this working now. So I was like, okay, well, I can't get into any of the boxes that I can't get into this box and I want to update my servers. So what can I do? Well, I happen to know of a particular computer in my home lab that has access to this jump box via SSH key but is password protected via SSH and not SSH key protected. So I go and log into that box with the password, and then I do some lateral movement, jumping to the jump box, and I manually install my SSH key for my phone, log out of everything, and then back on my phone, try to SSH back into the jump box, and wouldn't you know it, it worked. So I basically hacked myself by exploiting a vulnerability that was a server with password authentication, used that exploit, did some lateral movement to move to the box that I wanted to, manually installed my key, and now I have access to that machine. Technically unauthorized access because it was the SSH key wasn't in there before I manually put it in there. So yes, I hacked myself. So that obviously isn't the first documented case of me hacking one of the other core modules. And earlier on in the podcast, I talked about how I hacked my grandfather's AOL account to hack my grandmother's iCloud account. That one was pretty fun. So yeah, it's always interesting when you get into these kind of hacking scenarios, ethically, of course, because I had permission to do it in all the cases. Because especially in this most recent one that I just showed, it was obviously my system, and I gave myself permission to hack myself so I could do what I wanted to do. But yeah, those were all the clips that I wanted to do for this installment of the core modules. Which one was your favorite? Let me know in the comments below if you're on YouTube, or if you are listening on podcast, you can shoot me an email at contact@darkassassinsinc.com. And if you've listened to all 4 of the core modules episodes and there's a clip that I have not included that you really enjoy, also be sure to drop me that as well. Again, if you're on YouTube, you can leave a comment below, or if you're listening on podcast, you can shoot me an email at contact@darkassassinsinc.com. And that's going to do it for me in this episode of the Dark Assassins podcast. Until next time, my fellow assassins, remember, bull nothing equals true. If action not equal to null, return true. I'll see you next time on the Dark Assassins podcast.